Good morning, everyone. Welcome to BFI Southbank, those of you joining us here in person, and an equally warm welcome to those tuning in remotely. I'm Patrick Russell. I'm a curator here at the BFI National Archive, and the honour falls to me to briefly introduce today's symposium. This event is part of the Our Screen Heritage project, made possible with the support of the BFI Screen Heritage Fund, awarding National Lottery funding, and we would like to thank the fund and also national lottery players across the UK. So, what's today about? Well, one of the project strands is the archiving of online video. The archive's task within that strand is to collect 400 UK moving image works created for primarily or solely online distribution. Some key works, you've seen some examples, but also example works. Again, you've seen examples of those examples representing the many types of film populating online spaces. Engaging with online video is surely a necessity for the screen heritage sector, because online video represents really a paradigm shift in how moving image is produced and shared and therefore interacts with society, as huge a shift as the coming of film in the late 19th century and of broadcast TV in the mid-20th century. Online filmmaking is arguably the key story of film of our age, and it will require dedicated archival work to be sure it'll survive in a meaningful form for future generations. Now, in each of these paradigm shifts, new categories of content emerge. We've seen that with film, we saw it with television, and online video has given us, for example, Twitch streaming, reaction videos, unboxing videos, ASMR videos. And yet also in these moments, pre-existing forms can become absorbed by and then mutate within the new paradigm. In this case, advertising, public information film, fashion film, dance film, educational film, activist campaign film, home movies, screen journalism, corporate promotion and training, charity and health awareness raising, artistic experiments with film form. I could keep going on, I won't. But these are all traditions in and functions and sectors of filmmaking that have been with us, some of them since the 1930s, many of them since the Victorian era. But they are now principally online filmic forms. Curatorially, we need to situate the screen of now in the screen of then, and vice versa. We may be exploring some of these themes later. Archival wheels can turn slowly. It took decades for film and later TV preservation to be systematically addressed on an institutional footing. And each time there's challenges, conceptual, cultural, technical, and above all, our sector's principal and perennial challenge ever since the 1930s, challenges of resource. And there's a lot of learning on the job. There's a value in itself to our formally adding through this project 400 films into institutionally preserved national screen heritage. But of course, that's a tiny number relative to the scale of significant production. Just as important, we regard this as the foundation for doing much more beyond the project lifetime and as a test bed and a learning exercise. So we really want to emphasise the spirit of today's event, inviting people into that conversation. There are things you may learn from our experiences. We're equally keen to learn from yours. When facing a world of superabundance, to coin a phrase, there's far too much for only one organisation or body of people to be able to do alone. So, the meat of today is four panel discussions listed on the screen, which are each going to be convened and presented by staff of this lottery-funded project. I'll just run through them quickly to give you a bit of a taster. Preserving the early internet. Now here's, of course, where analogies with early film and perhaps early TV are hard to resist. Those formative moments when engineering, entrepreneurship and playful experimentation are in ferment before forms and platforms solidify. Charity Shop Sue at 12:30. This is a case study of a body of work that raises themes around what online has offered creators, but also communities around those creators. Again, that paradigm shift theme. Then, after lunch, by exploring the prolific online genre of the video essay, we can raise questions about our cataloguing practices and maybe about the nature of genre itself, the ontological status of genres, types, forms, categories. Again, online video, like cinema and TV before them, has both inherited from and added to the stock of cataloguable cultural forms. And finally, the internet is the archive. raises questions of community self-archiving, and its relationship to institutional archiving. Now, that's a currently very hot topic in heritage, but it's often thought about retrospectively. Can it be addressed more in real time? And how do we, as institutions, do better in engaging with that topic and with those communities? Again, with resource challenges always an unavoidable context, which may come up in our final panel of reflections at the end of the day. Later on, in fact, no, let me press this now. You can also get the agenda with more detail than you just saw on the screen via the QR code, which is available now. And you'll be seeing QR codes again. Towards the end of the day, we'll be introducing a QR code which will allow you to engage with the material that we're selecting for the archive under this project, a public call-out that is being launched today. A couple of housekeeping notices before I introduce our keynote speaker. Fire exits, one here immediately to my right, two at the back. Just follow the green illuminated signs. No fire alarm expected today. There will, as you've seen, be lunch provided. There will be drinks, alcoholic and non-alcoholic, at the relatively early hour of 4:30 p.m. But as the song title says, it's always 5 o'clock somewhere. Those of you tuning in remotely will have to cater for yourselves, I'm afraid. If anyone has any questions throughout the day, the registration desk will be open throughout for you to consult with colleagues there. Now, I'm delighted to welcome our keynote speaker. George Oates' full bio is in the notes provided as part of the agenda, but very briefly, George has worked in and around the internet since 1996, which I think might be the year that I first logged on. It was either 95 or 96 that I first experienced the internet as a then young person. George is co-founding executive director of the Flickr Foundation and argues that balancing a human-centered approach with large-scale data systems is crucial to curation and preservation in this, our age of superabundance. Thank you for listening to me, and please give a round of applause to our keynote speaker, George Oates.
Good morning. Hello, my name is George. This is a picture of me taken in about 1976. Basically, I'm just showing you this because I wish I had a pair of pink trousers like that, but I don't. But yeah, this is an old slide from my family photograph archive. This is my spirit animal, Agnes Varda. I recently saw her film again, which I can't pronounce in French, excuse me, but it's The Gleaners, about humans who pick up after a harvest. And I wanted to mention Varda here today because of her style and how much I love it. When I watch one of her films, I feel like I'm sitting in the room next to her, meeting the subjects of her work. And I also love the way that she adds her own self-reflection into the subjects which she is making work about. So I really do feel an affinity with her practice, and there's nothing algorithmic about it. I feel I'm a bit like that too. But I thought it might be good to just briefly introduce myself, give you my potted history. So I was born in Australia 1 million years ago, and I've lived in these various places over time. And here are some of the things that I've worked on since I fell onto the internet in 1996. I'm a failed student. Basically, I don't even have a degree, but look at me now. Most of my work has settled on interaction design, and I've specialised in designing big systems that hold millions of things. And I was lucky enough to be at the very beginning of the Flickr.com adventure, where I led design there until I was booted out by Yahoo in about 2008. Sorry, just let me get used to this device. Sorry, 1 second. Whoops. forgive me. In some ways, I suppose I've enabled part of the abundance that we're talking about today and that we're all experiencing now. So it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk with you today and reflect on it a bit. And before I really get going, I wanted to say thank you to Kitty and James and Christina and Gemma for inviting me and helping me to get here today. So, onto Flickr.com. It's this kind of gigantic, uncool photo sharing web service that turned 21 years old on just this Monday gone. So it's one of the grandmas of the internet now, actually. And here's a graph that I've sort of made up of uploads over time. So this is approximate numbers beginning at 0 and ending up at a big number. But the first million photographs were uploaded when the service was only 8 months old in 2004. Just 8 months after it launched, we already had 1 million things in the service. This is the millionth photo. It's called RNS versus the sale. And I actually resisted the temptation to scale it up for the slide just to make the point that this is the biggest size available. You know, the photos back then are smaller and the photos now are much bigger. But I think probably no bigger one than this exists in the world anymore. But yeah, Flickr's billions of photos today, uploaded by millions of people. And there aren't that many, if any, traditional cultural organisations in the world that have holdings made by millions of people. And certainly none that I know of that have collections in the billions of things. You know, we're putting our cultural heritage into these web platforms now, YouTube, Reddit, Flickr, Facebook, all these places, Instagram, etc. And I think people don't especially expect that stuff to survive. You know, there's this sort of strange insouciance that, you know, if a service goes away, oh, well, that's too bad. But on the other side of the coin, there are people who believe that if they do put their stuff in these services, that it will last forever. So it's a strange kind of dichotomy there. But back to me for a second. I got an email from one of the bosses at SmugMug, who now owns Flickr, at the end of 2020, asking me if I'd like to come back and think about Flickr again and work on it again. Mostly around the program that I started back in 2008, which is called Flickr Commons, and that's about getting photography archives from museums and libraries into the Flickr.com service so more people can see them, basically, and hopefully annotate them. And yeah, the program's still running, by the way. It's about 17 years now that it's going, and these photos have enjoyed millions, billions of views, loads of comments and interaction on the service. I'd be happy to tell you more about Flickr Commons after the presentation if you're interested. But yeah, it was during that period I was talking to the McCaskills where I proposed this idea of creating the Flickr Foundation, or flickr.org, which is what I run now. And it's essentially a separate not-for-profit that runs alongside the .com and asks different questions about what it means to keep this gigantic collection in one place, and certainly what it means to keep this gigantic collection inside a corporation. But our purpose at the Flickr Foundation is to keep Flickr pictures visible for 100 years. So why 100 years? Well, for me, it's because it's explicitly not forever, which I think is kind of not a useful time frame. 100 years away from now is sort of within our imagination, you know, although not many of us think about what might happen in the next century, although I think we're beginning to. Maybe it's sort of 10 or 12 generations of leadership in an organisation, and maybe there might be hundreds or even 1,000 people who would work there over the course of 100 years. So while we're thinking about a photography archive, we're also thinking about making an organisation that's already trying to think ahead, and in fact archive itself, which is a whole other talk, not for today. But to end my introduction today, I wanted to refer to the great American photographer Annie Leibovitz. We like her so much at the Foundation, we've named one of our web servers after her, and we have a Sontag too, of course. But anyway, in her book, which is called At Work, she writes, you can photograph the night with digital darkness. I use much less light now, less strobe. You can see more, but the downside is that the pictures can look a little crude. And I really wish I could see the mouse, but I can't. There's more written in my notes here on the thing. But basically, she goes on to say that she equates this sort of ability with early flash photography, where when cameras were first around, we started using really intense flash, and we weren't really in control of the lighting. And it took a while for that photography and those techniques to kind of bring down the tone of the photographs, And I just like this as a theme for this talk today. I think we're also now in a period of this intense brightness, this superabundance, and it's too much. So the talk's kind of about what kind of tools and strategies can we implement that just tones down the intensity and tones down the brightness a bit. So there's an anthropologist, a Canadian anthropologist called Dr. Hannah Turner, who wrote a book that's been hugely influential on my work called Cataloguing Cultures, Legacies of Colonialism in Museum Documentation. It starts as a history of the collecting and cataloguing practices at the Smithsonian's Natural History Museum, but expands also to reflect critically on legacy data and how crafting data is never impartial. So here she says the word data usually carries with it an assumption of veracity and reverence for the possibilities of impartial, omniscient technologies. And I just want you to think, as archivists and cataloguers, every time that you copy and paste a value from one field into another, what you might be wiping away, or what sort of opportunity you lose by obliterating the possibility of more detailed information. But I strongly recommend this book because it's, legacy data is fueling a lot of the work that we do in cultural heritage. All the collections that are older than, e.g., 50 years or 100 years, they're operating with legacy data. And that legacy data is also being used to fuel these enormous training data sets now that we see everywhere. So I always enjoy coming back to this sort of historical perspective on data and its bias and incorrectness and harm, and that's very much a thread of our work at the Foundation too. But yeah, these last 200 or 300 years or so of cataloguing culture has been designed to bring objects into a place, into a collection or into a museum, and to be retrieved or studied in that place. And every time your cataloguing system wants you to auto-complete some field for you, it's forcing you to choose something which might not actually fit. So the software now is actually sort of curtailing the way we talk about stuff, and it's a one-way description which is designed to put something in a place, and I think that cuts a lot of corners off in terms of object meaning. It's brutal the way that database design and even software interfaces rationalize meaning and culture, especially with, describing things poorly. Power objects are reduced to a single noun. Human beings are reduced to measurements. Our entire lives are reduced to a single item. It's all universalized, standardized, and not unique. And I think that really is not. I wish that the future would change that. But what happens to description when things are intentionally placed into a network? What are the affordances there? What are the opportunities? What happens when we describe things to move around or be osmotic or multifaceted? And I think Flickr is one of a very interesting information system in that regard. And I just want to take you through a quick example of what I mean. So this photo, it's called DSCN0658. It was uploaded to Flickr a few days ago. It was taken on September the 4th, 2022, by a Nikon Coolpix. The f-stop was set to 3.6, ISO set to 80, the flash was off. And here's all the EXIF data along the left that was created at the moment of creation, when the picture was taken. And for me, this is not especially usable to imagine what's actually in the picture. If I say f-stop 3.6, you don't actually visualize what that might mean. But if you look at the Flickr groups that the photo now belongs to, and groups, by the way, are an affordance of Flickr. There's a group for just about any interest, including these several graffiti groups. You sort of start to see a context for this picture. And you can also add tags as well to give you even more shape of what this photograph could possibly be. So looking at the metadata, you can sort of guess that it might be a colourful graffiti piece in Bologna. So at the foundation, we're imagining that there's value in splitting these types of description into technical metadata and social metadata. And we reckon that this additive social activity that happens only in Flickr.com is essentially different to the EXIF style information. It's often conversational too, this social data, and that's really hard to just shove into a field in the kinds of collection management systems we're using today. Another big part of my practice, even in the last, 10, 15 years, has been trying to reveal the structure of data and also bad data, showing bad data. I don't have any worries about showing other people's bad data. But, kind of dispelling that myth that all data is true. Like Hannah Turner was sort of claiming that we have this weird reverence, and I'm just like, no, there's no such thing. So it's okay to just allow people to see the warts and all. And one of my favourite techniques when I'm designing a web service is to have no search box. So you have to reveal the shape of the information rather than allowing somebody to have a look at something. They just have to follow their nose about things that they're interested in. And the other thing I just wanted to quickly mention is that at Flickr.org, we're also trying really hard to keep our tech in-house. We don't use the cloud yet at all, even though we're almost 3 years old. We have web servers in the office on Alex's desk that connect to the internet. We try not to use external JavaScript libraries to build our web stuff. We're trying really hard to be sort of self-contained because I think we rely heavily, we have an over-reliance on these sort of external and extremely powerful services. And we're trying to sort of cut risk of those sorts of things going away, So that's just a question for the group maybe to discuss over lunch, is just having a think about how many external things you depend upon for your tech stack and what that might mean in terms of long-term survival for whatever digitising and archiving you're doing. But yeah, in previous roles, I've worked on these two suggestions as well, to show structure of data and also to show roughness. And broadly, we found that audiences quite enjoy that. It's interesting to see the form of things, and it helps for better comprehension. So I just wanted to show you a couple of examples. So I worked at the Internet Archive around about 2010 for a few years, and unbeknownst to most of us, the archive had actually been collecting TV for about 20 years before I got there. I think there are about 20, maybe 30 channels from around the world, mostly United States, but also some international channels were being recorded. And this is an interface I designed to showcase a really intense archive of TV news that covered the week. The Monday from September 11 was a Monday, and covered the week, the few days after that. So you can see times running from left to right, and there's a row for each channel. And it doesn't take too long before you start seeing, after the plane hit just before 9 a.m, the TV, all the channels begin to show that same footage. But the interface is quite simple. You can click on any one of those thumbnails and then you see another 20 thumbnails, which is just a slice of, a period of time. I think this represents a few minutes. I can't exactly remember. And then you choose one of those and then you're watching the news footage. So this was the moment when the second plane crashed into the second tower. There's no doubt that this is a harrowing archive, but I still, it's weird to say, I guess, but I'm also quite proud of how accessible it is to get to the footage. But watch it with care. It is really, really intense. I also designed this big banner so people could stand around the archive and point at it and talk together and reflect on it in a small group. I really like materiality as sort of a response to all the cloud crap that everything's stored in the cloud now. I just find that a very frustrating statement. So I like trying to make physical things that represent stuff, and this worked really well when we took it to conferences and stuff. It's just a simple device. This second example is a lot less intense. It's called it's a toy called Netflix-O-Matic, and it was the first project I made after I moved to London in 2014 with my friends Frankie and Dan, and we built it in about a day. So at the time, around October 2014, Alexis Madrigal wrote this article in The Atlantic about Netflix genres and how he'd been trying to reverse engineer them all. And he actually ended up discovering about 76,000 genres which are hiding under Netflix.com. There's probably even more now. And that's, race against time comedies from the 1980s or gritty hitman dramas or whatever. So really specific, interesting, much better than, featuring a strong female lead. So in Netflix-O-Matic, you see just a randomly selected set of genres from the larger pool, and from here you can either click on single phrases, like Australian, or you use the red arrow at the end to see photos of that whole genre. Just like that. So super dumb, really simple, but people really liked it, and actually they really enjoyed spelunking the actual genre system itself, not even watching the movies, but it was just interesting to see Spanish language nostalgic dramas, which is not necessarily a phrase you would actually search for. Netflix-O-Matic, I think, lives in the Wayback Machine now because I stopped paying for the Heroku instance, which is another whole issue about keeping things online. You have to keep stuff warm, you have to keep paying for it. It's quite fragile. But now I wanted to fast forward a little bit up to 2020 and reference another work, which is by the artist Trevor Paglen, which I think is also about sort of seeing and showing the guts of the machine and what it's doing. Forgive me again, sorry, I can't read all my notes, but it says this is a piece called Image Operation, Opus number 10. It's a video installation. It's a string quartet playing the piece, Debussy. It's a Debussy string quartet in G minor, I think, Opus number 10. And the piece starts just with a camera shot of the quartet playing the music, but then it evolves into the scene being read by some kind of image recognition technology. And the reason I like this piece so much is by how far the computer misses the mark of what it's actually witnessing, because it's talking about, women holding cell phones while listening to this beautiful music. Anyway, I just really like that piece, and I like the way that artists are also trying to kind of, see the guts of what's happening. And it all comes back to this idea of sort of computing meaning for me, I don't think that just by shoving more training data into a machine that meaning's going to pop out, and I feel like there's a really strange kind of impetus towards that. We just keep making more and more and more training data, but for me that's really uninteresting. So Kate Crawford, this is a piece in Aperture from last year. She has this fantastic concept which is called metabolic images, which are produced by digesting billions of other images that are broken down into smaller parts and absorbed by AI models, which are then pooped out into streams of processed images. And she also says, we're in a moment of compulsory AI, non-consensual AI text suggestions and images infiltrating all of our actions on all of our platforms. And for me, I equate this to the harsh lighting that Leibovitz was referencing. This beginning of photography where we didn't really know what we were doing. Here it's just a brightness of overwhelm. It's a brightness of abundance. I do remember, however, feeling excited and quite happy when I saw this metabolic image pop out of Trump being arrested. But if you study the image, you can end up working out that actually, unfortunately, it's a fake. I found it on the BBC website in an article trying to help us all recognise when we're seeing metabolic images. But another book I have read very recently, which I really recommend, is Filter World by Kyle Chaker, journalist Kyle Chaker. I don't know if anyone's read it. Has anyone read it? Yeah. It's good, huh? Yeah. So Filter World is this idea that in about 2010, all of our digital experiences, give or take, became mediated by algorithms. It's that sensation when you buy a pair of socks on the internet and then suddenly you're just seeing socks everywhere, that kind of thing, you know. This bizarre kind of inexplicable avalanche of stuff. And I don't really know what to say about the inexplicable avalanche other than it's an inexplicable avalanche, you know. I was thinking about it this morning when I was watching a little video of a groundhog called Chuck trolling some farmer by eating carrots in front of the like farm cam or whatever, and I'm just like, why am I here? You know, just this idea that we've been swamped but also shaped by the sort of stuff that we're looking at, I think is really, really intriguing, but also sort of slightly terrifying. And I find myself looking for experiences that step right away from that, you know, that are not algorithmized. So swinging back to Flickr now, you know, this gigantic collection, how could we even begin to preserve these billions of things? And also, who should be responsible for it? You know, it's not necessarily appropriate for a corporation to be responsible for something like that, because it's just not what they're for, you know. But as my friend Bob Baxley said ages ago, he said this great thing, which is Flickr is a great place to be a photo. And that's because photos themselves are essentially social objects. You know, we pick them up and we point to various things, we write on the back, we spread them out on a table and arrange them, we carry them under our arm when we're escaping from a fire. You know, they're very important things. So I wanted to introduce you now to some specific work that we're doing at the Flickr Foundation, which is about, well, what do we do? You know, Flickr's too big to archive. There isn't an institution on the planet that could take that service and run it inside, you know, under their roof. It takes hundreds of people, millions of dollars. Oh, and by the way, it runs on Amazon Web Services, you know. So Data Lifeboat is an attempt to answer the question, well, what do we do if Flickr goes down? What should we do? How can we design for that instead of having it just disappear? So when you make a Data Lifeboat, you select a set of photos just using a URL like my photo page or photos taken at Southbank or all the photos tagged with Pavlova. Then you authenticate as a Flickr member so the system can figure out which photos you're allowed to see, because there's a privacy structure on Flickr, so you can have photos just for friends or private or public. Then we download the photos that Flickr account has access to and package them up into a simple HTML-based viewer and into a tar file, or maybe it'll end up being zip, don't know. And as we're baking that archival file, we also ask the creator of the Data Lifeboat to write a README for future viewers. I'll explain a README in a bit more in a second. Excuse me, but that goes into the Data Lifeboat as well as sort of indication of what's in it and how to use it. And I'm not talking about a single Data Lifeboat here, I'm talking about millions of them that are collectively determined by the community itself. So I might want to archive photos from there that are important to me for any number of reasons. It could be a family archive, could be, yeah, I'll go into that a little bit in a second. But we're also imagining where Data Lifeboats might end up. You know, could they be used as a way to take a collection of photos from this social media platform and place into a library or an archival collection? Or perhaps you just want to download yours to take it to your laptop or your Dropbox account just to sort of stash a copy. So in our R&D on this idea, we've actually sort of moved away from the sort of emergency use case where the ship's going down to, well, could we use this little container to gather collections? Because Flickr contains multitudes, you know, there's billions of things, as I mentioned, but really it's made up of very small communities, and in some cases large, but, you know, communities of interest, social groups, family groups, you know, groups of people who are really into graffiti, whatever it is. And there's all kinds of things hiding in there that are just waiting to be found, you know, records of events, family archives, quirky stuff, you know, just ephemera that will end up becoming something else if it lasts. I just want to show you a couple of examples. I don't know, I'm sorry, the news I'm using is quite grim, but I'm only mentioning this because for me, when the Notre Dame caught fire, in 2019, I remember feeling just really sad. I mean, maybe that was lockdown and all that talking, but for me, that was a meaningful event. And of course, it was all over the news. And, you know, this is kind of alarming kind of headline style photography. But personally, I'm also very interested in the pictures that are hiding in Flickr that depict a specific time and place. So citizen-led documentation instead of what you see in the headlines. It's just a different angle, and, you know, Flickr pictures are different, I think, from the images we see in the news. So we just look here about how people just sort of stopped on the bank of the river just to watch what was happening, and probably, you know, sat there for a long time. I'm just sort of wondering, maybe this is a collecting tool for, you know, an archivist who lives in Paris and keeps the city archives. Maybe she wants to also supplement what she's doing with this kind of photography, you know. Perhaps you might even like to gather pictures of when it reopened last year in December. And I found this in a Flickr group that's about the cathedral, you know, and there's 7,500 pictures in there, taken on the inside, taken on the outside, all times of year, people in them, not people in them. So it's actually a really good encapsulation. Or there's the family archive. You know, let me show you mine. Given that most of my actual family have Flickr accounts because I made them get one when I started, Flickr has a unique set of Oates and Fowley family photography and history just sitting there. So we made a data lifeboat containing the photos that I can see connected to the family accounts that are set in Flickr. So there's the README file that I mentioned before. That's the description that I created when I made the data lifeboat. It's a series of questions and prompts designed to help the data lifeboat creator do a good job of leaving a note to the future viewers about what's inside the data lifeboat and also what to be careful with. So this is a prototype, so excuse the plain design, but if you know my style, you'll see that this is kind of probably what it's going to end up looking like. But here's a screenshot of the prototype this is the readme.html file. And you can see in the grey box there, my notes say that this is a collection of Flickr photos from every family member I know on Flickr. And I also just say, these are private photographs, please don't share without asking first. But you can imagine that the sort of statement being anything determined by the content of the lifeboat. You can click around this data lifeboat because it's built in the mighty HTML, so you can just explore it like you would any other website. And here I find a picture of my nephews, Max and Alex. My brother Andy isn't a big tagger, so you can see some info that's more sort of EXIF-like, but it's also blended with the kind of social metadata that I was mentioning before. You can see a big version of the picture. And of course, if you're a nerd, you can also see the raw JSON if you want to. And these data lifeboats are designed to be sort of self-contained and also self-describing. So in the documentation of the data lifeboat, we're also taking some time to explain what a data lifeboat is, how it operates, you know, the kind of choices we've made on data structure and stuff like that. We don't use any external libraries to render this as well. We want it to just be openable in a web browser, which we are betting is a technology that's going to last for a while, because we've already had web browsers for whatever it is now, 30 years. So we're sort of assuming it's probably going to last for another 30 at least. But I'm always disturbed as well. I mean, the data lifeboat's about a specific selection, you know, photographs that I want to keep. I want to make a copy of my family pictures because that Flickr place is the only place where those pictures exist at the moment. So I want to make a redundancy for myself. And I'm always disturbed to hear the vast numbers of things that we are now processing and passing around the web and the internet without even looking at the stuff. I think in this age of superabundance, there are actually very few careful guardrails in place. And that's another thing we're working on with Data Lifeboat. You know, how are we designing this thing so the materials it contains can be accessed responsibly with some friction there, intended friction. And in our R&D last year, we ran several workshops with people who do digital acquisitions in libraries and archives and talked a lot with them about how we could support the extension of this the CARE data principles for Indigenous data governance, which is a set of principles that are used, were developed by Indigenous communities. Excuse me, I haven't written down the history, but it's a great initiative. Please read up on it. The URL's right there. 2 minutes. Okay, wow. That's okay. So check them out. They're really good. And the point that I'm trying to make there is we're not just throwing around giant lumps of Flickr. In fact, we're only Data Lifeboat will probably limit to a certain size, so you can only have a certain number of photos. It sounds a bit like the project that was mentioned at the start, where you have to make a selection. And these are the sorts of questions that came out in the workshop about what sorts of things we could add to the README in the creation process to help people as they make data lifeboats. So when they're opened up in 20 years by somebody who doesn't know about it, what's inside, the creators of the thing can describe. It's a bit like a time capsule. How do we help people use these images responsibly? How do we maintain privacy and permissions over time? It's that sort of thing. Okay, I'm actually sort of coming towards the end, which is good. I might go a couple of minutes over, but I'll try not to. As the great and good moving image archivist, who I hope you all know, Rick Prellinger, works out of California, he said in a presentation the other day, we're capturing more information than ever, but we're archiving less than ever. And we're just trying to slow things down. We want to help make people make great archives out of Flickr.com. Not just trawl the thing for images that they can shove into some LLM to do some evil facial recognition. And web archiving, like the tool that called the Wayback Machine out of the Internet Archive, we don't think that's quite doing what we need it to do, because web crawlers collect a whole bunch of other code and additives that aren't required to actually look at the thing. You can see here there's an example of all the files, like they're grabbing fonts and JavaScript libraries and stuff like that. But we've decided that we wanted to create a much simpler way to look at Flickr pictures and their metadata that doesn't involve us having to run the whole interface. I might skip, this is probably rude to do, but Hugh Locke's exhibition, What Have We Here? Did anyone see that? It was just at the British Museum recently. Yeah, I thought it was really fantastic. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because it reminds me of Agnes Varda's work, spending time with a thing and then reflecting and representing it. Locke spent 2 years inside the British Museum collection working with the team at the museum and representing a set of objects recontextualised to show more background about the Caribbean and slavery. He created these beautiful figures that you can see behind him here, he called the Watchers, which were sort of posted around the exhibition overlooking us as we were looking at the exhibition. And the whole thing was just a really fantastic kind of upending of normal British Museum vibe, which I really enjoyed. Fundamentally, I believe that social media services are sites of cultural heritage. They're worthy of selection and curation. They're worthy of archiving. Obviously not everything, because there's also a lot of crap on Flickr, which we don't necessarily need to keep. But hey, if I wanted to keep that photo of my sandwich that I ate yesterday, that's my choice. And Data Lifeboats are an effort to allow that to happen without this sort of need to archive the whole thing. But I want us to resist this easy road of consumption and computed classification that's happening, and be wary of these reductionist techniques that squish meaning or actually do harm. Yeah, we don't really control the brightness at the moment, and we certainly don't control it by adding more light. We don't control what's happening by shoving more training data into the situation. So our task as archivists remains the same, and that's to recognise that context is everything, and to continually ask ourselves which pieces of the past are we going to keep. So thank you. That's the talk. Cheers. There's my email if you want to send me a note.